decade, they've collaborated on unique and innovative ways of making science vivid. Since the human mind digests narratives better than it digests almost anything else, they use the history of science as a compelling way to introduce the complex principles of science both to their students and to the public. How we came to know what we now know is often the best way to see what science really is, and how science manages to build results that are stable enough to build upon. That possibility of building on other results is, most subjects don't have it. Mathematics has it, and science has it. And that's why those subjects grow so dramatically, become so complicated, but also so deep and powerful. They grow almost cumulatively, like compound interest. Last January, Dean and one of his students, Jennifer Horowitz, used this approach to give us some insight into the life and the remarkable achievements of William and Caroline Herschel, a brother-sister team who's, having started as amateurs without any formal training in the sciences, made dramatic observational discoveries and asked new questions that actually redirected the whole subject of astronomy into the path it has followed ever since. Today, Dean and Jeff will better acquaint us with two of the most colorful and original persons in the history of astronomy, Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler. Tycho realized that the directions of objects on the sky needed to be measured much more accurately than they had been, and he designed and then oversaw the construction of ingenious instruments of his own design that made dramatically improved measurements, despite the very limited capabilities of the technology of his day. He succeeded not only because he was very ingenious, but he was an unusually forceful and focused personality. Sometimes a steamroller produces more accurate measurements. Kepler was a remarkable and really creative mathematician and natural philosopher. That older term, natural philosopher, is really particularly apt for Kepler. Like many, such as Pythagoras, who became fascinated by mathematics, Kepler could discern the subtle music and architecture in mathematical structures, such as in Euclidean geometry, with its simple abstractions that then blossom into a cathedral of dramatic, interconnected results. Kepler's straining to hear the music sometimes led him astray, as it did Pythagoras much earlier, and as we will see tonight in Kepler's attempt to see the solar system as a nested set of regular polyhedrons. But he was a real scientist. If Tycho's data said no, Kepler listened, even though that meant he had to leave up his original hypothesis about the polyhedrons. That led to Kepler's laws of planetary motion, which served as a ladder that for Newton to establish classical mechanics as a reliable structure. So the beautiful music that Kepler saw was there, but it was at a place he hadn't expected it to be.
God aften. Jeg hedder Tycho Brahe, astronom på Det Kongelige fra Danmark og Bohemia. Min kollega.
Willkommen, ich heiße Johannes Kepler. Ich nehme an, wir sollten auf Englisch sprechen.
Yeah, so I presume you would prefer to speaking the Queen's English, so to speak. But first, I'll thank you for the very lovely introduction. It is nice to be known that we are still held in such high esteem. I presume our host would appreciate if we make this somewhat normalcy, even though it is rather strange for us. I do not know by what means we have come here today, but it is a great joy to be amidst a collection of, how shall we say, a congress of like-minded truth seekers who have also been equally captivated by the goddess Urania, the muse of the heavens.
Astronomy, being the most noble and ancient crafts, attracts only those of keen mind and probing intellects. And thus, by whatever curious circumstances have brought us here today, perhaps by some magic spell, although I do not see my mother here today. We are most assuredly comforted by the company we find ourselves in. Allow us to share again how the muse of astronomy has impelled us upon our course.
Indeed. For those of you who heard the description of my early life, I'm a man of privilege. My lineage is that of Danish nobility. I was not at want for comfort or education. I was selected to study the law and to be a member of the royal court. My family was very connected with King Frederick himself. In fact, it was my uncle who saved him from drowning while drunk in a canal in Copenhagen. But nonetheless, although I was not at want for riches, I had always said to my family members that it is not these luxuries that will endure, just like the power of kings. What truly will endure over time is the arts and works of the mind, for these are truly eternal. And it was the richness that I found in the heavens that inspired me far more than any golden orb or chalice. And it was, shall I say, in my university days, I was smitten by the goddess Urania, by observing something in the heavens that struck me, an eclipse.
Was that about the time you were smitten by something else?
Yes. So, my dear Kepler, I'm sure that you are referring to the jolts of the senses that I received.
Yes, I must be at.
When, in 1572, in the constellation, which I am sure that fellow astronomers will recognize. Young man, do you know what constellation this is? The Queen on her throne. If you listen, someone is whispering it.
Cassiopeia?
Cassiopeia, yes. In 1572, I noticed that there was in the skies a new star, yet undiscovered previously, unreported to us anywhere in Europe or anywhere in the world, as far as I know. And this Nova Stella was to be one of my great discoveries. That's the first published book that I wrote, and it was the first subject of true analyses astronomically to determine where this was it indeed a star, or was it something, should we say, is meteorological? Yes, as Aristotle claimed that comets were, that they were some sort of sublunary exhalations from volcanoes or such, and we determined that this was indeed a new star.
And whereabouts have you collected this data in your life?
Well, look, we mentioned that I was in, my family was in favor with the Danish king, and it was through his patronage that I was granted a fiefdom on a small island named Wien, off the coast of Denmark, between Denmark and Sweden. The island was known as Wien. It had been an outpost for the Vikings in the Middle Ages. In fact, one of the first kings who served there had the rather colorful name of Eric the Priest Hater. So I guess we stood where he stands ecclesiastically. But nonetheless, although the island did have its somewhat bellicose historical aspects, it was there that I would build my own castle. And this would be not a castle that would be of any ordinary stance. It would be not armed with ramparts and weapons, catapults and the like. It would be armed with instruments that were mentioned in the introduction, of my own design, great ormolu spheres, large celestial globes, and giant quadrants that were capable of keeping our measurements of the heavens down to essentially an arc minute of degree, which had been as to heretofore unknown in terms of accuracy. And it was with these weapons that I would lay siege to the heavens and try to unlock its mysteries. And this home of mine, as Kepler mentioned, became known as Uraniborg, and as it depicted there as the castle in all of its finery.
The castle of the heavens, but heavenly perhaps is not the best description of this place.
Here we go.
There's Uraniborg was commonly filled with revelers and celebrities, musicians, as well as scientists. My companions were mathematics and calculations, and the sacred geometry of the Pythagoreans. Alas, my eyes are too weak to devote to observation, but my mind is sharp, and it finds inspiration in speaking the harmonious language of the universe, mathematics. Man's glory lies in understanding of the harmony and rhythm of the dance, the harmony of the universe, first glimpsed by the ancient Pythagoreans. An understanding made possible through our unique gift of thinking in numbers. While Tycho labors in observations of the physical world, I pursue a deeper understanding of the forms. It was in this abstraction of geometry that I discovered a connection with the 5 perfect solids. 5 Platonic solids, which when inscribed within one another, could possibly define the ratios of the orbits of the planets. Of course, this is the reason there are only 6 planets. This glimpse of the cosmic architecture, written in mathematics and the beauty of geometry, became my mysterium cosmographicum, and was to become my life's work. All I needed was Tycho's data to prove my theory correct.
Yes, the mysterious solids, yes, again and again. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Pythagorean solids, young gentlemen, have you had the opportunity to study Euclid's Elements?
No, not yet.
Well, it will be soon. A special aspect of the 5 Pythagorean solids, if I may, Kepler,
Please let us see what you have learned.
is that there are only 5 polyhedrons in all of geometry, shapes, 3-dimensional shapes, that are perfect. In other words, every one of their sides is exactly the same. Yes? Now, this has been known since the time of the ancients. And somehow it was, this one we have is the dodecahedron, we have the polyhedron, the cube, the tetrahedron, and the like. There's 5 of these, yes. And it was Kepler's idea that these had some sort of mystic significance. As you will hear, he will go on and on about them ad nauseum. It is in fact, I believe that when Kepler came to join me in my observatory in Prague, he probably did arrive on a dead Hurston, a dead horse, a beaten dead horse. And you will soon hear why.
A dead horse might have been better company than Tycho's coterie of sycophants. True, many were talented, but sycophants nonetheless. True, they are insufferable. Between the dancing, the raucous music, and the wine. It was no wonder they couldn't reconcile Mars's difficult orbit. Their timid compromise of a planetary system. One evening, his pet moose became so drunk it fell down the stairs to its death. Perhaps, you would have had better luck consulting your fortune-telling dwarf, which is ever present at his many revelries.
He was very interesting man.
It is not a wonder that someone took a sword to your nose, probably to end your infernal jocularity.
Unskilled, excuse us. As you can see, we have been disputatious in our relationships at times, but perhaps in the harmony of the worlds, as you have described the universe, we shall try to have a more harmonious discourse for the rest of the evening.
Yes.
Well, disagreements, but nonetheless, both Johannes and I can agree that we were students of astronomy. We were both smitten by Urania. We had studied the scientific enterprises of the ancients. We knew of the work of Aristarchus. We knew of the work of Copernicus. We knew of the work of Ptolemy, Eudoxus. I'm sure all these astronomers who are familiar to people who are familiar with astronomy. And it was as we studied these gentlemen and their work that, and again, gentlemen, I was surprised to find that there are female astronomers now, so this is something we will have to discuss later in the evening. But we found that as we studied the work of scientists of the past, that there were sometimes mistakes, accidents, inconvenient observations that if one were to yield to authority, which one can never do if one is a true scientist, authority or must always yield to observed truth. I think we can agree with that. Even Kepler and I can agree to this, despite our disputes. We know that if you accept the truth, you cannot sweep these inconvenient discoveries under the carpet. No, perhaps if you are ensconced in the halls of academia and if someone asks a troublesome question, you could say, this is of no concern of yours, and we sweep these things under the carpet. But this is not allowable in science. And in fact, there are some people who will say it is because the will of God makes this the way it is in the heavens, but is it not to the glory of God to investigate these discoveries? And what Kepler and I found that mistakes made in the past, problems in astronomy, things yet unexplained, were fertile fields. Not something to be afraid of, something to hide from, but places where we could increase our investigations and unlock further mysteries of the heavens. And I trust that today that this aspect of science still holds true.
Yes, it is our belief that men of science do not always see eye to eye, but if they are true men of science, they will value a skeptical mind and dare to doubt and debate. This is how the truth evolves.
Indeed, I believe that that is, trust that it is true today. It is no great insight when you can see this evening that Kepler and I differ in many respects. Nonetheless, I mentioned I invited him to come with me to Prague after I was unceremoniously dismissed from my homeland in Denmark. But that is another long and unfortunate story. It does not involve a moose or a dwarf. But
Are you sure?
in fact, it involves true love. So, for those of you who are interested, I'll share this later from a romantic moment. But nonetheless, I needed genius loves company. Yes, great minds try to congress and to share the discoveries. So I needed the help of who was known as the wandering mathematician. So despite our disputes, it was essential that I could have his help in ascertaining the true nature of the cosmology, because this could indeed be our common cause, despite our differences.
Alas, we differ on cosmologies as well, as you might suspect. For I am an acolyte of the Copernican system, which places the sun at the center of all of our heavenly bodies. And Tycho here is a geocentrist. But rather than having us duel, perhaps we can settle this matter with the collective intellect of this body that is gathered here, this body of natural philosophers, I presume. Might I ascertain where you stand on the matter? Do you stand on a stationary Earth?
No.
See?
No hands.
You see, very interesting. Yes. They believe, as I, that the Earth moves about the sun.
I believe your mother perhaps cast spells on them as well. But, so, shall we investigate this in the spirit of scientific enterprise? So, I have no debate with the great Nicholas Copernicus. He is a magnificent astronomer. His work is outstanding. De Revolutionis is an excellent work of science. But the issue is, there is no proof. If we are on a moving Earth, should not there be parallax detected by the planets or the stars? And despite all of my efforts with all of my very fine instruments that are unparalleled in their exquisite precision, I have not been able to find any shift in parallax that would be accountable to the motion of the Earth. So, for this, I cannot agree with Copernicus. Furthermore, from a more conceptual level, for those of you who are not interested in the angular measure of the heavenly bodies, for the notion of parallax, the Earth of Copernicus hurtles through space faster than a cannonball, flying presumably around the sun. And this dizzying motion is not only singularly to explain the motion of the course of a year, it also spins on its axis very, very fast, 24,000 mile diameter, turns once, and if it did not do this, we would not have the concept of day and night. So, are you comfortable with those sort of mind-numbingly fast motions?
Indeed I am. The heliocentric system of Copernicus not only provided viable explanations of the daily, nightly phenomenon, but also explains the retrogrades.
As does mine. For those of you who are familiar with the retrograde motion, it's
But
indeed.
does it offer such a simple and elegant model as that of
Yes,
Copernicus?
the mathematical elegance again, yes. So, but we will continue. So, if Mr. Copernicus is correct and Herr Kepler is correct, how might you explain, if the Earth is spinning, why aren't birds, when they alight from their nests to fly off on their appointed daily journeys of whatever birds were meant to do, why do not they return to find that their tree and their nest has left them behind as it rotates away at 1,000 miles per hour?
Perhaps those assembled might have some suggestion. Yes.
Because the birds are rotating along with the rest of the earth.
See.
By what means would the atmosphere be keeping pace with the Earth? How is it held in place? Do I have an answer for this?
Inertia.
Inertia.
Gravity.
Gravity. These ideas.
These are interesting terms that I am not aware of, but may be willing to be elucidated. So,
Is this concept of inertia? Yes.
Well, the atmosphere was created while everything was spinning.
Ah. How do you feel this?
well, we are looking at creation myths here. We could talk about the Vikings saying that Thor decided to belch out the planet Mercury, if we so wish. We can make up any type of stories that we want, but I am curious, as again, no one has particularly answered this notion of why on earth, if I leap into the air, do I not land in Latvia as the earth turns under me? Explain this concept of inertia. Madam.
Not inertia, but it's a perspective. Take a ball, and you're in your carriage, toss it up and down. Start
Indeed.
moving the carriage. The ball will continue to go up and down just into your hand, but from someone outside, they will sort of see the ball seeming to make a different path. So it's all perspective.
Oh, this is very curious that this should be raised. Are you a female astronomer?
Yes.
Fascinating. Now, as we can see that, who is responsible for this theory? This was not you.
No, I have corresponded, however, with this upstart mathematician in Italy. His name, Galileo Galilei. Is this similar to some of the correspondence he has had with me and some of his publications? Your argument, I find similarities, yes?
Well, interesting. You mentioned that it's Italian, yes?
Indeed.
Presumably in the Papal States. And as a papist, I am interested to find out what must the Jesuits think of his argument of removing the earth from its natural place in the heavens. I presume that they are busily looking through their scriptures to find evidence of heresy, yes?
Yeah. Well, the last things I recall is that he is drawing the ire of Pope Urban and his supporters, but I do not know how that all turned out.
Perhaps one of our guests.
Yeah.
How did things turn out for this Signor Galileo? Anyone?
Not so well.
No? Specifically.
He ended up under house arrest
I see.
for the latter
So,
part of his life.
the
For
Jesuits.
because his ideas were incorrect?
No, because they were correct.
Ah.
He was a Copernicus.
Because they were unorthodox.
Yes. And why would this man be persecuted?
The Jesuits aren't fond of compromise.
No, it's now mentioned compromise. Yes. I find that rather interesting coming from your tongue, Herr Kepler, because despite the planets circling the moons and the sun and its satellites in orbit around the Earth, these aspects can be analyzed in a way in which compromise can be sufficient. I will show you with my system. If you were so quick to besmirch the Tychonic compromise. And what we have here is the best of both worlds. This is the sun, Copernicus, with the planets circling around it. Then the sun with the planets circles around the Earth. Rather ingenious, is it not? A perfect compromise.
Why are there 3 planets around the sun?
Well, we have Mercury, Venus, Mars, and there will be more, but that's all that I can fit
Yeah,
on
Jupiter
my
and Saturn.
on my printing. Yes, they will be all. And interestingly as well, this does explain retrograde motions as well, because it is in essence an echo to Ptolemy's epicycles. Yes. So at times the planets will be circling backwards, as is observed by any astronomer if you watch over the course of the time. That during several weeks you would see a planet traversing in the opposite direction. This is now explained through my theory as well. So it is not lacking in evidence that Copernicus is so quick to claim as his own.
No, again, the elegance of this model is not quite paralleled to the Copernican model.
I can see that even though you are a very staunch Lutheran and a religious man, that you do have something in common with the Jesuits, your inability to compromise.
The truth does not equivocate.
And neither does the Inquisition. It is my cosmos that allow the earth to sit still, to the comfort of all. The ecclesiasts, princes, the astronomers, and maybe to the dismay of you and your Italian friends and these misguided individuals. So, again,
But the heliocentric model aesthetically recognizes the obvious, that the sun, the immense and fire giver of light and heat, should be at the center, the way many pilgrims converge about a campfire. Further, it provides a singular reason to impel the planets in their orbits, rather than each planet beholding to its many wanderings.
well, the Pope in Rome has no problem with the Tychonic compromise. Martin Luther would have no problem with the Tychonic compromise, because with your Copernican double motion, you have double the trouble.
The truth offends the wrong-minded. Proof is what prevails.
Kepler, you see, is a very accomplished man. I will admit to this. And perhaps he is very most accomplished at offending people and taking offense by those he thinks consider him very lightly. And I am not one of these people. As I have mentioned, I will hire Kepler and invited him to come work with me in Prague. So, history attests that I am a man willing to collaborate. Now, this aside, Kepler is a man of strong convictions, and this is something that anyone can appreciate, even if these convictions are such that he believes that the planets make music as they fly through the heavens, and that there are some sort of mystical, geometric secret to their universe. But, nonetheless, my system allows for the Earth, its dubious clerics, to remain firmly seated, yet it embodies the best of both worlds. And it is proactive, it is an advance in science. It does challenge the theories of Aristotle, the immutability of the heavens that was claimed by Aristotle, that things in the heavens will never change. Testament to this was the new star. My observations of the comet in 1577 allowed me to do observations to understand its parallax and its motion, and it was realized that this is traveling beyond the orbits of the planets. So if the planets were held, as Ptolemy said, in crystalline spheres since the time of the ancients, a comet would smash these to cinders. So this could not possibly be the case. So I know that this theory, even though it is a compromise, does have aspects that are, I would consider, fully modern. And again, it is not offending. I do not have neither Catholic nor Lutherans chasing me with pitchforks. You have been chased from time to time.
But I ask you, what about Mars? The orbit of Mars certainly didn't fit. It didn't work in your system, but if it weren't for my uncompromising system and determination, this troublesome orbit would never have been rectified. It would still be confounding astronomers, as it has you.
Yeah. Credit where credit is due. That Kepler's work did resolve the troublesome orbit of Mars, one that had vexed me for many years, despite the accuracy of my instruments. Mars would just not be where it's supposed to be, varying by as many as several degrees, and this is of arc, and this is completely unacceptable if I am trying to measure into fractions of degrees. So this was not this was unsettling to me, and this is part of the reason that I have tried to invite Kepler to join me.
Indeed, yes. And with your data on Mars, I did solve the problem. It was not at all easy. I have promised you in 7 days I would have solved the problem. It had taken much longer for me to do so. But my discovery of the elliptical planetary orbits led to the exquisite law of harmonies, the crown jewel of the new astronomy, and the new Copernican cosmos.
As you can see, we are at loggerheads. There is no chance that passage of time, apparently, it seems to have been hundreds of years, seems to have done little to quell our prejudices. So, perhaps, with the help of this erudite collection of scholars, astronomers, and stargazers, we will see if we can have them as arbiters to make this decision once and for all, because we certainly cannot come to the conclusion. So, what then is the true countenance of the heavens? What things have come to pass in your time that have led us to believe that Copernicus is indeed correct? We have the example of Signor Galileo. Have there anything else that has proven that we are in a heliocentric universe? Yes, sir.
Parallax was finally observed for the stars, but it's much smaller than you expected because the stars are so much further away than anybody in your days imagined.
Interesting. And about what time was this the parallax discovered? Anytime soon after my memory ceases to be?
1850.
Fantastic. Well, it did take some time. It's just not to know that someone filled my shoes too quickly. So another example, yes, other than stellar parallax. Yes, sir. Yes.
Comets have been seen to go around the sun.
Indeed, that is very
conclusively shattering the crystal sphere.
And one would remember, in the time when I observed the comet in 1577, there was still the superstitious, particularly in Germany, where there's all such things, the demons in the woods and the like, thought that there was a great doom to be coming. And at the time, I must admit that in my early days, it was use of astrology, and these things were the arrival of a comet was seen as some dour circumstance, and now we realize that now then perhaps comets are just visitations from heavenly bodies. So this is enlightening to know. I'm sure that in this time, and we can bring this up now because
my horoscopes. Perhaps this is my German heritage, but they are very, very accurate. My horoscopes today, the horoscopes must be incredibly accurate. Yes.
Doom and gloom.
Many comets.
There's some sort of comet coming to predict doom and gloom on this year that we exist today.
Next week.
Well, but is it safe to presume then, I guess, that astrology is of somewhat dubious character? I find this interesting. It was a very good way to make money.
Indeed.
Nowadays, yes. Oh. Might I ask, for those of you who are familiar with the event of the new star in Cassiopeia, have we discovered what this new star was?
Supernova.
Fascinating. Though the word nova, super, I presume it's better than a nova. What indeed was the nature of this? Was it a star indeed?
It was a very large star that came to the end of its life and exploded.
Fascinating. And the brightness was visible during the day for a month.
Yes.
So are these regular occurrences?
Rarely.
Yeah. Once every 100 years or so.
Well, that's sufficient.
Yes.
I'm very excited to know that I was the first one to catalogue one of these. So, perhaps
Chinese astronomers who saw other supernova
Well, I am not. Well, I've gone far in my travels, but not so far as the Orient. So, and last I remember that they're not particularly fond of Westerners. So, we will leave that to be discovered later.
And vice versa.
I am very curious. Has anyone discovered the music of the spheres in this day? Yes? Perhaps? No?
As I did not think would be the case. sorry, Kepler, but
Perhaps then
Sound
I
can't
have-
travel through a vacuum. Space is
Right.
empty between the planets.
well, there we are. Well, I always thought it was rather curious. Anyway. Might I explain your theory, Kepler?
Okay.
That the planets, because of their ratios of their orbits, the period to the distance reminded Kepler
Yes, those are
Oh.
the musical scales.
of musical scales and tempos. So perhaps as the planets move through the heavens, they make a music of their own. So that perhaps Jupiter would go like ah la 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 la. And that here on Earth, our planet also has its music. But since we live here, we are used to it and take it for granted. Much the same as one lives across the street from a blacksmith. One is not bothered by the sound of hammering all the time. So we would actually have to go to perhaps Venus to hear the Venusian music.
There's
So,
gravitational waves, but the sound is rather weak.
so I see. So Kepler, I'm very sorry. This was something that was very close to you. So
Yes.
it's rather satisfying.
I have also
There you go.
speculated in my somnium. I have written that perhaps in a dream I have visited the lunar surface.
Gaseous comedy. Such things. And remember, we mentioned Kepler's mother casting spells. You know that she was arrested for being a witch, for essentially trafficking in drugs that would make you hallucinate. So
She is a quarrelsome woman, yes.
well, nonetheless, but using her magic spells to go to another planet, I find is something that no matter how far we wait in the future, that there will not be visitations to the moon.
Men have made the journey.
What is this? Huh?
Really? Exactly. To the lunar surface.
Yes.
And what has become of them?
The day they came back.
By what means have they traveled? Was it like as I
Rocket ship.
suspected, with some form of witchcraft?
Rocket ship.
Was a rocket?
Chinese rocket.
So propelled into the heavens.
And they brought back lunar rocks.
See, did they discover creatures as I speculated?
No.
The lunar rocks are much like the rocks on Earth.
Nonetheless, I think I owe Kepler an apology. Apparently the Somnium was not a work of science fiction, it's a work of science fact. Yeah. Well, shall we say, I think it is safe to say, I will admit that I have made this mistake. Have there been any other great astronomers who have had a fortune-telling dwarf or a pet moose? I think not. So it is nice to know that my primacy has endured the ages, and I will be remembered. I will not live in vain. I shall be remembered always, at the very least for having a fortune-telling dwarf named Jep.
I much prefer to be remembered for the discoveries I have made, leading to the advancement of our understanding of the cosmos.
Well, yes, Kepler, and this is the reason why you were not invited to very many parties. No. But this, nonetheless, it is good to know that apparently, as Herr Kepler has said, and I have said I do not hold him in low regard, and he is a very wise man who said that the purpose of life is to wonder why the universe is the way it is and not otherwise. And apparently, it is very comforting to us to know that the natural philosophers of the future, men and women, are taking this question to heart, and that they too are trying to ask these questions that are enlightening the trajectory of man and showing us the true countenance of the goddess Urania. And without further ado, we'd like to turn the questions to you, if you would like to ask any of us.
Can you say anything further of the interactions of scientists or proto-scientists of your time with the religious and political authorities of the time?
But I was lucky enough to be in Denmark. Martin Luther, we tend to think that he was a man of a more liberal view of the work, but he was just as staunch in his beliefs as any Jesuit or any Pope. And he was not fond of Copernicus as well, and thought that his work was impetuous and deigning into the heavens of trying to read the mind of God. And these things, in my time, were issues as well. In the northern countries, Scandinavia is known for, in general, a more liberal approach to these freedoms of thought. So I personally did not have as much arguments as some of my contemporaries in other parts of Europe, and as Eric Kepler can attest, although he is a man of a very devout man, that there were issues in raging through Germany.
Indeed. And I am, as you mentioned, known as the wandering mathematician. Much of this is due to the conflicts of the day that forced me from city to city and patronage to patronage to allow me to pursue my work.
Yes, in fact, when I was hired to Kepler to come to work with me in Prague, when I was forced to leave Denmark, it had nothing to do with these sort of ecclesiastical arguments. It had to do more with social and political. As you see, when I was a young man, I not only was smitten with Urania, I was smitten by a young lady named Kirsten Jürgensdottir. And she would become my common-law wife because she was a woman of low station. She was a commoner. Her father was a minister, but not a member of the royal family. And it was I was held in very low esteem for deigning to marry a woman of a much lower station, and this eventually would become my downfall, because it was the son of Frederick II, who was saved by my uncle and gave me the island of Wien, that his son took over and was a impetuous young man named Christian IV, and he was very attached to the mechanisms of propriety that would go around with the royal affairs. And it was deemed that I did not belong as a member of a royalty. And there also was some issue that, speaking of my, how should we say, disdain for ecclesiastical duties, one of my fiefs that I was granted was the Royal Cathedral in Roskilde. If you have ever been to Denmark, this is where the kings are buried. And it was my job to make sure that the ceiling didn't leak. And unfortunately, it did leak from time to time on Christian IV's father's grave. So that was part of what drove me to Prague. But when I was in Prague and invited Kepler to visit, he came to visit, and we established a contract whereby he would work with me. When he returned to retrieve his family from Regensburg, I believe, that the countryside was overrun with war at the time, and he was actually, all of the Lutherans were kicked out of the city, and he was not allowed to return. And to Kepler's credit, when he was given the opportunity to, he could stay if he wanted, if he would renounce his faith, and Kepler denied this, and went on his wanderings, and eventually led to Prague. Yes?
You have a wonderful set of contraptions up there. What is the big wooden
Oh, this?
instrument there?
Well, as you mentioned, I hear mention of people mentioning such things as telescopes. Well, I've heard of lenses that are used by children to observe things, but I presume that there has been some sort of advance in observing. But in my day, that we did not have anything that was an optical instrument with lenses. This was a cross staff, and this is what we would use to measure angular distances. So if I wanted to measure, let's say, the distance from Regulus to the Moon or Venus, I would put them in the sights, which I have at the ends of this rod, and I would slide them so that it would match, and now I would say, there's my star, there's my other star. If I know this distance, and I know this distance, I could use simple triangulation to measure the angular degree here, and I have one for close objects and one for far objects. And it was this was the first instrument I had when I was in university, smitten by astronomy there. And it was soon after that I used my royal inheritance to build very much larger devices like this. In fact, the ones that I had showed pictures of earlier, in fact, the Great Quadrant on your honor board. This instrument was 22 feet tall, and it was finely marked down to tenths of degrees, and it could be used to observe any motion in the heavens, any location of any object in the heavens. It would pivot around, and these were installed in my castle in Johannesburg, whereas the parapets of a castle, one would think, in my castle, they were retractable, so that you could open the heavens and use the instruments to measure these things. So it was literally an exercise in geometry was most of the observations, but I did not have any sort of aid to the eyes.
But surely you must have noticed the rotation of the Earth.
But again, and at one point, by studying Mars, we talked about Mars, I thought that I had discovered a parallax, and this would have opened the door to Copernicus. But unfortunately, I realized that my observations from the altitude where we are in latitude for Denmark is rather high, so some of the planets are rather low on the horizon, and that the atmospheric refraction could account for these variations in parallax. So I had to, although I wanted very strongly to accept these measurements, they were called into question. And again, if I had observed them accurately enough to my specifications, I would have adopted Copernicus' theory with open arms. Again, a lack of truth, a lack of proof.
I was kind of curious about, I assume Johannesburg, was that in the Baltic or the North Sea? And I understand the weather up there is rather overcast with the other time. Would you be able to have continuity of observation?
Well, there were many nights, and if anyone has traveled to the Kingdom of Denmark, the Danes are a rather dour personality, and I think it's much to do with the weather. And there were many days where observations were impossible. But over the course of 21 years, I inhabited Johannesburg. So over the grand scheme, there were enough days to compile a compendium of data that was unparalleled. The location of Wien was exactly in the straits. For those of you who are familiar with the geography, the town of Elsinore in Denmark was the king's castle that was at the closest point to Sweden, and it was where he put his cannons to make sure everyone would pay their tolls. So Wien was right in the middle of the strait here, so it was neither in the Baltic nor in the North Sea, so it had somewhat more stable air, not as bad as the North Atlantic, but enough, like I said, to compile 20 years, and Kepler can attest to the quality of my data.
Indeed, yes. Thank you very much.
What were the other subjects that the two of you studied to be well-rounded, to have a cultural background, a scientific background, and a medical background?
I began my education in the clergy. I studied, of course, the Latin for our instruction. Mathematics, of course, was key to me. I recall that my lowest grade from my instructors was in mathematics. I called this into question, of course, as I believed to be the best of the students. Herr Maslin said, of course, that it was made to spur me onward. It did work. So beyond theology, mathematics, of course, we have also studied things like alchemy, introducing elements, concoctions of different substances.
In the basement of Johannesburg was an alchemical furnace that I used for studies and studying the aspects of the various components of the Earth to see if they could be connected to what is happening in the heavens. And as we know, that anyone, I believe, has alchemy consisted, even though astrology is now no longer in fashion. Do tell me that you are still alchemists from time to time, yes?
Yes, we just renamed it a little bit.
Oh, very well.
Chemistry.
Very well. Oh, just a change in one letter, we'll accept this.
It's all chemistry.
But the notion that the heavens were connected somehow to the ways of chemistry, as you say, on the Earth, this is the reason why we say someone is mercurial in their attitudes, or why someone is Saturnalian in their lethargy. It is because perhaps there is the connection, and I firmly believe this. When I laid out the plans for Johannesburg, they were laid out with mathematical and alchemical precision, so as to align to the coordinate directions. And my gardens were such that I studied apothecary as well, because we all know that alchemy and health were inextricably connected. to answer the rest of your question, I was intended to study the law when I was at University of Copenhagen, and then eventually I left Copenhagen and studied in Rostock, and it is there where I was, how should we say, smitten into astronomy. Yes.
Do any of your instruments still exist?
Now, you will have to answer this question, but if I were to somehow understand across the days, would you know, sir?
Well, 9 years after you fell asleep in a sort of permanent slumber. Okay.
Sounds very relaxing.
Your younger colleague was able to actually make some improvements on telescopes because Galileo and some other people in the Netherlands were able to take two different lenses and put them in a tube and make telescopes.
Yes, the double refraction.
Yes, the double refraction. So your colleague here was able to go on and even improved on the Galilean telescope and had a Keplerian telescope. So it was discovered that Venus had phases, and that is what led to the victory of the elliptical orbits and the
So you were
somewhat
keeping this
Copernican
evidence secret
system.
until now.
Yes,
so,
yes.
You
You unfortunately perished. You went somewhere else 9 years before you had the opportunity for Kepler and others to make these exquisite measurements.
I remember. My
Probably you had a really bad tummy ache.
Yes, I recall.
The last thing I remember was sitting in drinking wine and beer with the burger of Wittenberg, I believe it was, and it was impolite to leave the table to relieve oneself. So the last thing I remember was rather, shall we say, an inability to relieve oneself. So yes, but that's the last thing I remember.
Yes, it was unfortunate. As we spoke of alchemy and apothecary, and I have tried my very best to revive you and to bring you back to good health, but unfortunately it was not to be.
I find that hard to believe that you had your eyes on my data for many years to come, so I imagine you were absconded with them. I don't have a question.
Yes, addressing this to you, Tycho. Don't be dismayed because this Congress of Astronomers has dismissed your geocentric theory. If you leave this room and go out into the streets, you will find many, many people that still believe in Keep heading south and you'll find more and more.
So some things have not changed over hundreds of years, yes. So,
Question for Johannes. I was thinking of your instruments and the primary measurements that you make, and then I think of equal areas at equal time, I guess with regard to
the second law, yes.
It seems to me that final principle is quite far removed from your primary measurements, and it must indeed have taken some clever math to see through all that.
Indeed. As many have said, I have seen...
In fact, I'm curious how you get the distances. You can measure angles well enough.
Oh, you remember that, if I interject, that speaking of Copernicus, and credit where it is due, it was Copernicus who established in De Revolutionibus the, how should we say, the distance ratios of the planets just through simple triangulation of the locations of the planets where they are at elongation and opposition. And it was known not so much the distance in it's miles, so we measure in miles in the Americas, the distance between the objects, but we knew that the ratios, and these are the ratios that Kepler would use. But I think that with your discovery, which we have since been informed of, that the planets do not travel, and this was the mystery of Mars, was that it does not travel in a circle.
They are moving in elliptical orbits. Their speeds are variable, yes. And there is, of course, a curious ratio between the square of their period and the cube of their radius, these distances. And so this curious ratio that all the planets obey seems to suggest to me a common reason for the planets to be moving about the sun. What this is, I am not so certain, but there's definitely some suggestion of connectedness between these heavenly bodies.
Well, and there is something to be said for Kepler's willingness to depart from his theories, which we have now learned to be somewhat held in fantastical ill repute. But to his credit, that there was a time when Copernicus thought that all of the planets traveled in perfect circles, as did Ptolemy, as did Eudoxus, as did Aristarchus. The perfection of the circle was undeniable, yes, but it was Kepler who realized that if the planet Mars did in fact travel in an ellipse is no more than a conic section, the same way a circle is a conic section, or a parabola is a conic section. So it shows that if one is willing to break away from their inherent prejudices, that if you are opening your mind, that if something turns out to be, no matter how heartfelt it is to your being, to your original assumption, that you may have to discard it and go in a new direction and perhaps be rewarded by something that is as elegant as that the planets travel in conic sections. That's it.
I was kind of curious about the mathematics going from geometry to calculation. Now, in those days, did they have the concept of decimals, or did they use Roman numerals? It seems to me to be really cumbersome to be able to do things in Roman numerals.
And now you understand why I hired Kepler. These tediums are something that he found essential. But the use of measuring in a decimal system had been established by Simon Stevens in Belgium, in Bruges, a mathematician. And by that time, that the utility of that had trumped. Although ecclesiastical mathematicians in let's say in Italy and in the Jesuit schools would still be instructed in using the numeral systems prior to the Arabic system, but we would have used these mathematical abstractions, and especially Kepler. I logged data; he was the calculator. Madam.
Just out of curiosity, did you have the concept of negative numbers?
Well, we understand that concept of subtraction.
Yeah.
But in my world, I wouldn't have to go out and calculate sort of like the negative number of planets I saw that evening. So it was, but yes, mathematics had been established for quite some time. The Pythagoras, who established the 5 perfect solids, as you know, for those of you who have studied Pythagoras, we understand that his, when my cross staff uses the Pythagorean theorem, yes, but you may not know that Pythagoras also was a member of a lunatic cult based on things called irrational numbers. So the notion that the square root of 2 would be enough to throw someone overboard from a boat to keep that secret. So yes, the sophistication of mathematics was there, and in fact, I would venture to say that mathematics would have been the most sophisticated of the sciences, and the ones that had less deviations and less susceptibility to being personal prejudices. One can believe that 2 and 2 is 3, but it is not the case. Yes, sir.
In your time, did you do your own arithmetic, or did you have the room full of computers in the original sense of that title?
It was Herr Kepler did most of the arithmetic on his own.
Pages and pages of manuscript, yes.
I was fortunate enough on Wien that I could invite scholars, young men who had been studying in the various colleges in Europe, from all over Europe, all the way down to the Italian states and England, came to Johannesburg and did the calculations for me, which was a privilege of having a royal patronage, yes. So it was common that there were 20, 30 young gentlemen who would be doing observational calculations, especially on the evenings when it was impossible to do observations. After, of course, we would have a banquet with the moose and the dwarf and the like. Yes, sir.
Could Kepler tell us one more time in simple terms what is Kepler's law and how you figured that out?
Yes. So I have 3 laws of planetary motion. The first is simply that the planets move in elliptical orbits about the Sun, which is located at one of the 2 foci. The second law, perhaps we could call it the law of equal areas, will suggest that the movement of the planets about the Sun is variable. And so the planets will sweep out, a planet will sweep out equal areas if drawing a line from the planet to the Sun in equal time periods around its orbit. And
How
so,
do you figure that out?
see, the calculations have been years and years in coming to resolve the elliptical patterns. The
If one simply draws an
use-
ellipse, it's not too particularly challenging to calculate the area based on where it is